Let's say if I can say this right. Ahoy, dobrý večer. Kind of. Thank you. I hope my English is better than my Czech. Let's see some hands. I know that most of you guys are Java developers. Who among you is still a desktop application developer? Don't be shy. Okay. So hopefully this talk will be very interesting for you. And for those of you that didn't raise your hand, don't worry. There's still a path to salvation for you. And hopefully these slides will show you something interesting. So, what I believe I'm qualified to give this talk to you. I'm a Java developer since the beginning, since '95, so that's quite a long time ago. I'm an open source believer. I started with Linux, and I think that many people in the world started using that, and they got into the world of sharing code. And that eventually led me to discover this language that has a very cool and wacky name, and it's Groovy. Any of you guys here know about Groovy? So. I will expect Bastard to do a good job introducing Groovy to you guys. If not, then you can pester him. And so I became a member of the Groovy development team in 2007. And 1 year later, along with two other guys, two friends of mine, we formed the Griffon project, which is the topic of today. And as Roman said, I'm from Mexico, but I'm currently living in Switzerland, working for Canoe. And I was recently appointed Java champion, which only means that I need to work harder. All right. So I'm going to go briefly through these slides, and then I'm going to throw myself into a live coding session. I like my sessions to be very interactive, so please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. I hope you will have questions. So in the past, remember when we had to create a desktop application in Java? Well, it's kind of painful because of two reasons. First, Java the language is painful to use. Yes, repeat with me. Java the language is painful to use. Why? Because it's very verbose. Yes, it's amazing. It is much better than what we had before in 95, C and C++. If any of you guys remember those days, forget about them. With Java, we're much better. But building a desktop application in Java is still very painful. You have to write a lot of things. You have to please the compiler. And on top of that, you have to please the API. The API is terrible, is horrible, is huge. So this application that I'm going to show you is very trivial. It's just a frame that contains two text fields and a button. Whatever text is entered in the first text field is going to be copied to the second text field when clicking the button. Now, how many lines of code does this take? Well, we can see at line 15 where the frame is created, then two text fields, then we create a button, then we use those lovely anonymous inner classes to define an action listener. And line number 22 is actually the behavior that we want to invoke. Is it too small for you, Baslev? I can make it a little bit larger if you want. So line 22 is exactly what we want. But look at that. We had to please the compiler creating a new interface, using an inner class for an interface that defines a contract and all that. But it's just one line that we want, and there are 4 other lines just around. Okay. And then here's some other portion of the API when, if you didn't know, you had to add the content to a content pane on the frame. And the rule has changed across the years. Previously, you had to add them directly to the frame, then to the content pane, then when they went back to the frame, and then they went back to the content pane. It's like, what is it? Is it black? Is it white? The swing team doesn't agree yet. And, okay, so that's it. If I run this application, remember, it's just a trivial application. It took us approximately 33 lines of code to get it going. If I click the button, I should see the text on the other text view. Yeah, it works. Okay, so now extrapolate from this example and try to build a full-blown application like an IDE. Do you really think you can do it in just a few days, in a few weeks, half a year perhaps? I don't think so. Besides, you will need a good tool to work around Java. You need an IDE in order to work with this language, otherwise you cannot be productive. So, that is the Java way. Is there an alternative? Of course there is. Let's look at the Groovy way. Now, this application is the same in behavior. It takes us 12 lines of code. We not only gain visibility because we don't have to type a lot, but also see, remember the application is a frame with two text fields and a button in between? Can you see the structure, the UI structure right up there? Is it easier to read? Is it harder to read? I will say it's a little bit easier to read. Here is the frame. Inside, then comes a block. Inside the block, there is a text field, a button, and another text field. Maybe you can see this better. And if you click the button, here's what happens. The text of the output text field becomes the text of the input text field. It's clean and simple. If we run the example, go. That's much better. And it's the same behavior. I hope I spelled that wrong. But as you can glance, the code is more readable. If it's more readable and you write less, then the theory says that you inject less bugs in your code, right? One of the advantages of using this language, Groovy, is that you can use modern programming techniques like closures. So this block right here is a closure. You can use properties. You can actually use this pattern, which is called the builder pattern. So this node, frame, is aware of its properties. And when you invoke a block of code next to the node, whatever is inside the children node will be added to the parent container. So the builder is aware of the hierarchy within the different nodes. No longer do you have to add explicitly a node into a container. The builder will do that for you. But this is just the standard Groovy way. If we start building a huge application with this thing, yes, you will write less code, but you will eventually hit a roadblock, which is, well, for starters, how do you, would you like to build this application? Which tool? Ant? Maven? Gradle? What? What will be the standard structure of this application? Where will the libraries go? Where will the view classes go? Where will the services or logic, where will we store our persistence information? Where will we put our other helper classes that will allow us to build this application? How are we going to test the application? All these things are put, you need to think of them up front before creating the first line of code of your application. So that's exactly where Griffon comes in. And sorry. Again, this is the same application, but it's a little bit shorter. Why? Because I'm using binding, and I'll show you binding in just a moment. But what I'm not showing this one is that behind this particular application, there is a common structure. There is a command line interface that will let you create the application, build it, package, test it, install plugins, uninstall, create new commands, and pretty much help you all the way from inception to delivery of the application. And from here, I guess I'm going to now I'm going to switch to creating a new app. Okay, here we go. Let's bump Yeah, that's better. Whoa. Yes, thank you very much. So, Griffon is a open source framework. It's licensed under Apache License 2.0. You can download it from griffoncodehouse.org. You can do anything you want with it. Once you install it, it's just a simple zip, or it comes in a jar, or it also comes with EasyPack installer, which should work in any platform. Once you have it installed, it will enable a command for you. The command is called Griffon, just two F's. And then you can say something like create app. Let's give it a funky name, so you know that it's actually live. I'm not joking here. No magic tricks, at least. Well, there's a little bit of groovy magic going on. So I change to this directory, and at this point I can run the application. Now, I just created it. I haven't touched any single line of code, but there is already a working application, very minimal, of course, but we can change that. What you see is that the Griffon command is compiling some code, packages the application, and here is our first Griffon application in all its glory. Simple frame with a label. But you know that desktop applications are not only delivered in a standalone mode, as you just saw. We can deliver them in web start mode. What do you have to do to package an application in web start? Well, you have to create a special file called that uses the syntax, the JNLP file syntax, which is XML. And I don't know about you guys, but I hate XML because it has pointy things, and pointy things hurt you. So I prefer to use something else. As a matter of fact, I prefer that if the framework was able to know what configuration should be used to create this JNLP file. If we follow the conventions of the framework, then there is nothing that we need to touch in terms of configuration, which is exactly what I'm going to show you now. If I want to run the application in web start mode, I just need to run a command, run web start. This will compile the application if it's not done so, which is we already did. It will package the application in the appropriate way, signing every single jar using a custom certificate. But if you want to deploy this in the real world, in production mode, then we'll use a different certificate, a real one. Then we'll generate the JNLP file and launch the application for you. Again, I haven't touched any single line of code yet, and of course, any single line of configuration. We see the dialog popping up. In just a few more seconds, it should ask me if I trust the signer of the certificate, which is me. And here it is. Now, another thing that you may have noticed is that I'm running OS X. And Java applications on OS X always look bad, and they don't look native enough. Well, first clue is that the name of the application is the right one. It is not a class name that we usually see. The second thing that I see is a logo on the dock, this one. Okay, that's a little bit better. We can do better than this. If I create a second application using another bootstrap method, let's say this will be the cool application, and I'm going to use something called archetypes. So if you have worked with Maven before, you know that Maven comes with this feature called archetypes, that will let you bootstrap a project in certain ways. So for now, just forget about Maven. Don't think about Maven. Maven bad. And think about archetypes. Okay? So the first application that I created used a default archetype, which is very simple. This one creates a little bit more things. And as a matter of fact, it's installing 2 different plugins. I run into this application, Griffon run app. It will take a little bit more, just a few more seconds, because there is more source code. I'm going to show you after this how the source code looks. and what's going on. Copies more files. There are a few more libraries. There we go. Now this application has a correct name, as a content pane, status bar, menu bar with default actions. None of them are connected yet, but they are just suggested to you. You can remove them, you can add more. And especially on OS X, we have integration with the About menu, which is native. If I click it, I get a different dialog. This one will list all the plugins that this application has installed. And I get additional dialogues. This text comes from this file, which I can manipulate, I can change it, and then when we can see those changes, I can click just escape. Oh no, this one doesn't, it's in the next version. Okay, click close. License, yeah, that's one thing that I noticed in this particular version that I'm running, so I fix it for the next one. Okay, and there we go. Now, I know you guys are dying to see the code, so let's see it. There we go. Oh, okay. So a few things that we need to know about Griffon. There is a standard structure that every Griffon application has. If any of you have worked with Grails before, Grails is for web apps, what Griffon is for desktop. So Grails has a Grails app directory. Here in Griffon, we have Griffon-app. Inside this directory, there is a convention of artifacts. For example, there is controllers, that's where we put the logic of the application. There is another for models. Models in the sense of presentation models. They work to let data flow from the views to the controllers and vice versa. They are not domain classes. And finally, we have the views. There are other artifacts that we can have, like services, that I will show you in another example. So, this particular controller, there are actually two. All the dialogues that you saw, the About dialog, credits, or license, are handled by one single controller, which we can see. Let's see if I can make this thing larger. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. The show method. It looks a little bit convoluted, but what it actually does, if I read it to you, is on the line 14, it tries to locate the window that is going to be the owner of the dialog. Then, if no dialog has been created yet, from lines 15 to 22, it will create it using some default properties or values coming from the model that belongs to this particular group. Then, on these two lines, it will try to resize the dialog to some particular size, if some is defined. It will pack everything, and finally, it will locate the dialog at the center of the window that owns that dialog. If I were to do this in Java, I would have to type like 30 lines more to get this done. Another thing that is interesting to note is this annotation at the top of the method. There is a golden rule when working with Swing. Every UI component needs to be created inside a specific thread, the event dispatch thread. If you break that rule, then your application is very likely to become unresponsive. And that is why you don't see that many Java applications in the wild. It is hard to follow this rule because it's not enforced by the compiler. You have to be aware of it, and you have to work around it. In Griffon, we add this thing called, this annotation is not just a single annotation that is just there to give you a hint. It actually gives a hint to the compiler, which will generate the appropriate bytecode instructions so that the whole show method will be invoked always inside the event dispatch thread, because we are telling it to invoke it with this policy. We can give it more hints, like execute always outside of the event dispatch thread. That's what you have to do when you invoke a long-running computation. Oftentimes you see on the network bad examples of Swing applications where someone says, hey, it's very easy to connect a Swing application to MySQL or JavaDB. See, I click this button and I automatically connect to an action listener that starts a connection on the database, fetch the data, and it's added to the table. Well, that's bad, because that database connection is established inside the UI thread. If the UI thread is busy fetching data from the database, who is rendering the UI? Well, the same thread, but it cannot do two things at once, right? So it either fetches the data or renders the UI. That's why it's bad to do these things inside the UI. That's why in Griffon we provide facilities for you to know that when you want to do something inside and when you want to do something outside. The view for this thing, let's see one dialog. I think that the credits dialog is the simplest one. The button that closes the dialog is this one. We are defining a JAVAX action. We're just setting some properties on some object. And then, right here, we create the button that wires that action. Inside the definition of this dialog, we see there is a tab pane that has a title, comes from some internationalized bundle, but it defaults to written by. And inside that table pane, there is a scroll pane which contains a text area that should contain the contents of the file that I show you, which should be Griffon app, resources, credits. But I think that I may be losing some of you. Let me show you something which is very similar to this. Think user local Griffon. This is where I have it installed. Swimpad, this should work. This is, yeah. Let's see which version I have for this particular application. Okay, that's the correct one. Griffon run app. There's plenty of metadata that comes around with a Griffon application that you can inspect. For example, that particular file that I just saw at the beginning of it contains the name of the application, its current version, the version of the Griffon framework that is supported by that particular application, and the list of plugins that it has installed. At runtime, you can gather all that information and do whatever you want with it. Okay, apparently I need to install some plugins for this to work. What I'm going to launch at this point, well, plenty of new plugins. So that's another thing. If you're attempting to run an application that doesn't have all the plugins installed, it will download them and install them, which is exactly what is going on at this point. I thought that I had everything running, but it serves to show one of the other features of the framework. You don't have to install everything by yourself. If the metadata is correct and you have access to the network, then all those plugins and all those dependencies can be resolved, which in this case it doesn't. There is one problem with this one. I know what's going on. It's easy to fix. Now you're going to see something behind the magic. Some of the plugins are configured using this particular file, which we call follow the Griffon ABCs. There are 3 configuration files that you need to be aware of. A for application, which configures everything that an application can do. B is for builder, which is the one that I just changed, which provides the definition of all the visual nodes that you can put on a UI script. And C is for configuration, where you can put logging or additional properties. Okay, there's something else going on with this particular version. Sorry about that. If it doesn't break, it's not live. This one has one particular problem with Groovy 1.8. There is a binary incompatibility happening with this particular version. I can change it, but then I will have to reveal part of the trick. Sorry about that. I'll come back to that in a moment. Let me show you something else. Well, a little bit more than I told you about. That's the homepage of the Griffon framework, which is inspired, by the way, in JSR 296 and 295. JSR 296 stands for Swing Application Framework. Sadly, it is dead. JSR 295 stands for beans binding, which sadly is also a dead JSR. But we took inspiration on this, and Griffon provides an application lifecycle and binding for beans. Now I should change to 15, I guess. Another interesting thing about this particular framework is that not only can you build applications using Groovy or Java, you can use Mira, which is a Ruby DSL for writing Java bytecode, or you can use Scala if you want. There is also support for Clojure, Erlang, and Python. So this framework is definitely polyglot aware. Other stuff that you can do, well, it's trivial to create charts in Griffon. The source for this particular UI is contained right here. There is a node called PyChart3D. There are different nodes. There is another for bar chart 3D, every kind of chart that you can think of. You set some properties, define a data set, and then finally put the rendering behind this, this chart. There are other plugins that provide 3D charts, like this one. And the source for this chart, this is done using OpenGL. This is the formula used to calculate each one of the points on the surface, and some other things going on. For example, the some colors. Here's a color map rainbow property that is used to generate this colorful map. It's not really that difficult. As a matter of fact, this is the same Java code that I just removed semicolons and used property accessing that you can do in Groovy, but it's actually quite simple. All the stuff that you can do with this thing, you might remember CoverFlow. Well, the source for this component is this. There is a gradient panel that has the grade on the back, right here. And this is the actual CoverFlow component that contains a list of icons which are loaded using variable expression. And when the component is shown at first time, it displays on the fifth element, well, actually the sixth one, which is the globe one. There we go. Some other components that you can see. Okay, I guess that the problem is that the window is too narrow. These components come from a friend of mine, Gary Grunwald, also known as Hansel on Twitter. He decided to create these nice looking UIs 1 year ago. Now he has a process that transforms Fireworks images, and I'm talking about Adobe Fireworks, a tool made by designers for designers, translate that into FXG, which is the format that Adobe provides for designers to define a component using Flex. But he created a translator for FXG to Java 2D, and you get this thing. So what you're actually looking at are not just images, those are swing components. If somebody told you that swing looks ugly, well, look again. Those components can look actually nice. And maybe you just have figured out what's going on with this particular presentation software. You are looking at a Griffon application. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a swing application with Griffon. This is not PowerPoint. This is not Keynote. This is swing. Believe it or not. If you don't believe me, I can change the look and feel and change it to ugly metal, and you can see that's actually Java. What about that? Okay. So let's continue with examples. I have another one. Oh, so I said, okay, assuming that you have both the idea of Griffon being a good tool to develop desktop applications, and assuming that you are happy with Groovy, it's very likely that you will say, hey, Andres, this thing is cool, but At my current job, we're a Java shop. We are not allowed to use any other language that is other than Java. So, thank you, but I cannot use Griffon. Well, actually you can. What if I were to tell you that you can create an application, let's say, let's call it real, adding additional parameter to the create command and say file type Java. Now, all the default templates that are chosen are Java. And this is real. I'm going to run it on the background and I'm going to show you the code. So it will compile in just a second. Really? Yeah, it's going on. You know, it's Java, it takes longer to compile, it takes longer to please the compiler. You know, it's true. There we go. So apparently it's the same thing. But if I look at the code, now I have a Java class. If I look at the view, I warned you, it's going to be a little bit ugly because it's Java. There we go. There's the frame. This method, the body of the method is executed inside the event dispatch thread. We set an icon image, get content pane, and here we define the contents of the application. And the contents of the application is just a panel that contains a label. Nothing more than that. So you can build an application using 100% Java sources. Here's another example that I can show you. Let's see, type. Let's go to sample directory. This one requires beta 1, perfect. So, how many of you have had the need to issue a query on the Flickr APIs? Usually, probably building a web application. You know, it's actually simple. Working with REST is perhaps feels a little bit natural. You only need to process JSON most of the time, or maybe XML. But doing the same thing on desktop is a little bit hard. So this application that I'm going to show you will query Flickr depending on any tag that you add here. So let me warn you that I have no control of the images that are going to be displayed. If something really funny appears, not my fault. So let's start with Groovy. Because I have connection, yeah, nice. See that waiting strobe? I cannot click anything, that's nice. It's connecting to the network, and now we see this thing. See, I told you. A pair of groovy guys. Let's see some more photos. Nice transition again. Apparently that doll is groovy. And there we go. Anyone can venture a guess of how many lines of code this application has. So let's see what we have. There is a text field, a button, 2 navigation buttons, transitions. I have to connect to the network, fetch the data somehow, and present it on this panel. Another thing that you need to consider is that if there is no text, the search button becomes disabled. But if I start typing text, the button becomes enabled. How many lines of code do you think should have? Oh, that's very aggressive. No, I would love it to be 10. It's actually 10 times than that. 104 lines of code, if I'm not mistaken. As a matter of fact, there is a command in Griffon that will tell you those things. if you are really picky about how many lines of code that you're writing, and you want to write as less as possible, then you can use the stats command. And let's see, there are 6 lines of code on the model. The view is only 38 lines of code. I'm going to show you. The controller is 28. There is a service, 23. Life cycle, which is regularly for every single application, which I think that the only thing that it does is set up the appropriate look and feel. And configuration, there is an event handler going on somewhere. 104 lines of code. If I show you the view, it's actually nothing. I mean, it's like, really? Are you kidding me? Is this all? 3 actions, 1 for the search button and 2 for the navigation buttons. Notice that the search action, there is a property called enable, which is bound to something. That something is the model. Models, as you might remember, they are presentation models. They just deliver data from the view to the controller. So this model, this object, has a tag property. And that tag property is observable. It means that when you change the value, it will trigger a property chain event. So you can attach property chain listeners and use the regular Java Beans mechanism for listening changes on properties. So this is exactly what we do here. This means that whenever the tag property of the model changes value, the enable property of this action will change either to true or false. The tag property that it is actually a string, so we need to convert a string to a Boolean. That's why we have a third parameter here. This method will return either true or false. If it's blank, we haven't typed anything, or we type it a lot of empty, a lot of spaces. The string again is just blank, so there should be a false value. If it's not, then it should be true. The 2 other buttons, whenever I click one of the buttons, I will invoke this action. And for the case of the search action, this other action will be invoked. We will see what's going on with the controller. And the rest of the view in all its glory. Remember the awaiting dialog when you click the search? It is done using this component. It is a third-party component available in Google Code called JBC component. We just wrap it in a nice looking node for Groovy. Then inside there is a panel with MIC layout. You have worked before with UIs and Swing. Please don't ever use gridback layout. Worst layout ever. Choose and prefer MIC layout. Then there's the label, a text field, the button which relies on the search action. Then there is the button panel. Again, there's another layout there, MIC layout, contains 2 buttons, navigation buttons, and then there is a panel that has a transition layout. And that's it. That's the whole UI. So where is the rest of the application? Well, we know that there is a model. Here's the model. Only 2 properties. These annotations will generate all the boilerplate code for these properties to be observable. Just by annotating with @bindable those 2 properties, I will have add property chain listener, remove property chain listener, get property chain listeners methods on the Flickr model class. And calling set tag on this class will fire a property chain event. If you do this in plain Java, you have to type a lot. And you do this in Groovy, it's just 1 line. Then the controller. The controller has the search action. And the code, I think it reads a little bit like English. When we are starting the action, we will put ourselves in a busy state. That's how the waiting dialog gets activated. Then we ask the Flickr service, which is a class that we have right here, there's a property, to execute a search given the tag that we wrote to the model. Then we collect here we are creating UI elements. For each photo that is returned from the Flickr service, we create a scroll pane that contains a label, that contains an image icon, just to display an image easily. So this list contains a set of UI elements. Finally, back inside the event dispatch thread, we locate a container that we know that should have the previous images, if there are such. Remove all the images, then iterate over the list of images that we defined here, and attach them to the current container. And finally, if something went wrong or everything went fine, again, inside the event dispatch thread, we signal the waiting dialog to stop. We are no longer in a busy state. So you might be wondering, how do we connect to Flickr? It's also very simple. Here it is. There is the search method from the service takes a string, which is a tag, and we use another magical method coming from a plugin that you didn't see that I have installed, which is the REST plugin. The REST plugin allows me to connect to the network using a REST interface. I set the URL, which is right here, some properties to connect to a particular URL from the Flickr API. And for each element that comes from that response, I iterate of all those elements and make a second connection using just a regular string that is transformed to a URL. Remember, if you wanted to do this in Java, you have to catch a lot of exceptions, malformed URLs exception, and maybe the server is not available, and so on. So Jacob, you know how is it with dealing with JAX and REST, right?
Yeah, you know, using Jersey, it's quite simple.
It's quite simple, exactly. It's similar. Yeah. So fine, at the end, this method returns a list of elements that has some properties. A tooltip property and a URL property, which are used to create the images on the controller, which then are added to the view, and then you get everything displayed. There is another version of this application called JFlickr. Come on. Is it? Oh, thank you. This is the same application. The only difference is that this one is written in Java, 100% in Java. No, I'm not using Jersey. I should, perhaps. And this one is 265 lines of code, but there are 21 more lines of code that I'm not showing and not counting because the view is defined in XML. If you really need to, you can define the UI in XML. But this goes to show, I'm using Griffon, this is Java, writing the same application, even using Griffon, in Groovy is 3 times less the code than in Java. Okay, so I guess we are getting close to the end of the talk. Let's say at the moment, the latest release made 2 weeks ago is 0.93 beta 1. We should have 0.93 final in less than a month. And that means that we are really getting into the process of releasing 1.0 in the coming months. One thing that we would like to do for the framework is to rework the whole plugin system, because if I failed to mention before, Griffon was born as a fork of the Grails codebase. So even though the project was born, the first release was made on September 10 of 2008, by then we already have 4 years of development because we forked Grails. In itself, Griffon is 2.5 years old. And the plugin system is the same as in Grails, but there are a few things that we don't need and some things that we actually require for desktop. So that's why we're going to rework it. Of course, there is going to be more documentation and additional application archetypes, not just Jumpstart and the default, and we should fix some bugs as well. After 1.0 is released, there are 2 important things that are going to happen. people keep asking, so if Griffon is so familiar to Grails, where is the persistence story? Where are the domain classes? How can I use GORM inside Griffon? Well, that's coming after 1.0, because GORM is tightly coupled with the Grails API, and we need to create our own API. Why? Because you can run a Griffon application in 3 modes. I showed just 2, standalone, WebStart, and applet. And because WebStart and applet applications need to be as small as possible, we do not embed Spring. We do not embed additional dependencies that are not needed. Those other dependencies can be installed as plugins, and you can use them for a standalone mode. We will have better multi-toolkit support. At the moment, Swing is the default one, but you can use SWT if you want. You can use Pivot, and if you're running on Linux, you can use GTK. In the past, we supported JavaFX 1.2.1, and you know that there is a new release coming up, JavaFX 2.0. When it's ready, when it's released, we will see what can be done so that those libraries can be ported as a plugin, if it makes sense. And if you have any ideas that you would like to see for this framework, please let us know, get in touch. One thing that I would like to mention is that at Canoe, we have this program called Share at Canoe, which is basically a way for us to come to your place of work and do peer programming for half a day. This is no strings attached. This is completely free, out of charge. And given that we are in Basel, Switzerland, coming to Prague or somewhere else in the Czech Republic, it's not really that far away. Finally, well, I guess that it's time for questions. There is a book coming up called Griffon in Action, written by myself and 2 other friends of mine, Dan O'Ferrin, the original leader of the framework, and Jim Schindler, another great guy and early adopter of the framework. And that's my Twitter account in case you like to get in touch with me. So if you guys have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. Yes?
I have 2 questions too. The first is, I don't want to learn Groovy a lot. Precisely did too much into it because I already know Java. Can I take benefit from Griffon? You said many times it's a polyglot framework. Can I understand that every inventions made in Groovy/Rails have a Java APIs?
Yes.
Can I use?
Yes, definitely. One advantage that Griffon has compared to Grails, and actually Grails is keeping up with Griffon in this case, all the artifacts that you saw, controllers, models, views, service, and additional ones installed by plugins, they do have a base Java class. So the Griffon compiler will inject those classes and interfaces during compilation, but given that they exist in Java, normally you can extend from them. So that's how the JFlicker application was created, as a matter of fact. If I show you the controller, no, actually I guess the model of the JFlicker one, this is it. Remember that the Groovy one had only 2 properties and made tag and BC observable? This is what you had to do in Java to make it observable. I extend for a base class that has everything to make it observable, declare 2 properties, define the getter and the setter, as you would regularly do with Java. The service, full Java. Yeah, it's verbose, but we are used to it, right? And let me show you that even in Java you can do bindings, like this, with a fluent interface design.
Okay, because I like ideas implemented in Rails or Griffon, but still prefer to write in Java because I spent many years to learn it and I know it very good. So, but just take the best, pick the best of the Groovy and use my favorite language.
Yeah, certainly, and because again, these are there are abstract classes, base classes, and interfaces for pretty much every single type in the Griffon core. You can take advantage of them in your favorite IDE. Everything you will have code completion, suggestion, refactoring, everything available to you.
And the second question is very related to the first one, and it's about competitions. I spent 1 month ago to investigate what's this NetBeans platform about.
NetBeans RCP.
Yeah, NetBeans RCP exactly, and at least after this short presentation, for me, it seems that the NetBeans platform is richer. Can you comment this idea or show me, for example, some case studies or something like this to compare these, let me just say, desktop frameworks?
So in the desktop framework arena, there are two that are always mentioned. There is NetBeans RCP for Swing and Eclipse RCP for SWT. I think that NetBeans RCP is the more flexible of the two, because even though most of the applications that you see that are built using it follow the same structure, which is menu bar, pretty much like the NetBeans IDE, you can build applications that look nothing like it, but you don't see them, but you can. There are plenty of plugins for the NetBeans RCP platform, and it also comes with its own what is it called? The basic behavior of NetBeans RCP is modules.
Yes.
And there's a virtual file system module. Everything, it revolves around that particular way of work. In the case of Griffon, we have other stuff which is the MVC, which is actually simpler than that, but that doesn't mean you cannot build on top of it. And I wanted to show you the list of plugins, which is I cannot see on the web, but I can definitely see here. Griffon list plugins. Thank you. I have a Swiss keyboard, and I remember I'm from Mexico, and I used to have a different layout. I've been battling this Swiss keyboard for a year, and I still can't learn it. This should list all the plugins that are available in the local central repository. And if the network proves to be, yeah, there are plenty of them. Things that we can see, for example, serialization, different serialization mechanisms. You can use Apache Thrift, protocol buffers, Avro, Hessian, Burlap, HTTP invoker from Spring, database plugins like CoshDB, SQL, Membase, Memcache, Ryak. There is CSV support, plenty of testing with Fest. Fest is the best testing framework that I have seen. If you have seen Jammy or JFS Unit, don't. Go directly with Fest. It is 100% Java. It has a fluent interface design, so when you pair it with Groovy, you don't gain much because you only lose the semicolons, but the rest of the API is quite friendly. And there are definitely more things that you can see, and most of these plugins will work with the Java version of a Griffon application. You don't have to do nothing more. And plenty of look and feel plugins to make your application look nice. There is the REST plugin over there. And I don't know, there are plenty of things that you can do with this thing. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Any more questions? No? Well, thank you very much for your time. I hope you have enjoyed it. Please give it a look. If you do give it a look, please let us know what you think. All feedback is welcome. If you do not like it, if you say, hey, you know, Andres, this stuff doesn't work, I will go back to using plain Java. It's okay, but please let me know why it didn't work for you so that we can make it better. So, again, thank you very much.